Welcome to the Lazy CEO podcast, where Jim Schleckser, author of Great CEOs Are Lazy and founder of the CEO Project, features compelling experts and topics for CEOs of mid to large-size companies. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome, everybody, to another Lazy CEO podcast. My name is Jim Schleckser. I am your host and the founder of the CEO Project. I have today an expert, like really, literally a global expert on the topic of leadership, Dave Mitchell from Leadership Difference. Welcome, Dave.
Oh, I'm happy to be here, Jim. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm thrilled. You know, leadership is such a sort of a tough topic for people. I remember taking a leadership class in my MBA curriculum. I'm like, as I reflect on it, I'm like, man, that was a waste of 3 credit hours. So I'm glad to have somebody who really understands it, because everybody talks about it. Everybody says they do it, but I'm not sure sometimes. So maybe you could just start with, help me with like your definition of leadership. What does that look like?
You know, that's an excellent place to start. And honestly, Jim, so I started my company 28 years ago, and I was in leadership roles in corporate America prior to that. And it's a hard thing to define, because one of the things I've noticed is it's very contextual, right? I have worked with people who had amazing success in leadership in one situation, and then found them in another situation, and they were not able to replicate that same success. So it really begs the question, is leadership an intrinsic trait and characteristic that some people have? Is leadership situational, where I happen to be a good fit for the situation that I currently find myself? I do think that one of the defining characteristics of leadership is always the ability to inspire other people, the ability to unite a diverse group of people around one unifying goal. Now, I think because goals can change and the diverse group can change, that same individual that was able to accomplish that in one setting may struggle in another setting. But that, to me, is the cornerstone of leadership: is, can I inspire a diverse group of people to pursue a singular goal? That, at the end of the day, I think that's what leadership is.
Yeah, I've always liked you're not a leader if you don't have followers, and people, it's a choice, right? It is, particularly in this environment, I willingly choose to affiliate myself with you to the direction you want to go in for a whole bunch of reasons. And that's leadership. If you can attract followers and bring them in a direction, you're a leader in my book.
Exactly. Yeah. Well said. Absolutely.
Yeah. Hopefully to positive purposes, right? Don't use the force for evil, use the force for good, but which we've seen.
Yeah, well, certainly that would be the preference. Although, I mean, we've certainly seen effective leadership with very toxic expectations and toxic, desires. So I don't think you can use the term leadership and make the assumption that it's always a good thing. Leadership is just a thing. How it's used could be good or bad.
It's like a carpenter's hammer. Put it in somebody's hands and it's a beautiful tool. Put it in my hands, watch out, right?
And it's a finger killer.
Yeah, usually thumb for me. But so let's go there, because you sort of hit it on contextually relevant leadership. And what are the demands on the leader to be flexible? Because what you defined there was, you take Jim and he's successful in a turnaround, and then I put him into a larger company that's doing great. It's got a real positive, collegial environment, and he performs extremely poorly. He's the same guy. The context changed. So what is the obligation on a leadership relevant to and their ability to be flexible? Do you know where I'm going with that? It's sort of an EQ, flexibility, agility question I'm asking.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of layers to what you just posited there, but a few things that I find, I heard for many years, and I was a subscriber to this, that self-awareness is one of the cornerstones of great leadership. But the more I was around, particularly C-suite level executives, particularly the people that are listening to this podcast, I would find people that were self-aware, but they were toxic. But they knew they were toxic.
Meaning, like, I know I'm toxic?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
I would take these C-suite level executives aside and say, hey, I don't know if you realize you're doing this, but that what you're passing off as a sense of humor is actually very, very derogatory in the impact it's having on your colleagues' willingness to share things and give feedback. And the person will say, yeah, that's just kind of my sense of humor. And I'm like, well, it's not working. So they're self-aware, but they're not really practicing what I refer to as metacognition, which is you have to be self-aware, and then you have to evaluate, why am I that way? Is that useful? How do I change that? If I can't seem to change it, how do I bring someone in to augment me, to protect me against these things that I do that are toxic? And I think that, some of these situations that leaders find them in, some of these behaviors that are not useful are minimized and are not that important, or the situation is elastic enough that it will tolerate that toxicity based on the positive things that this people's bringing. But there's a shelf life to that, right? At some point, people are like, all right, we're done with dealing with this part of you. You've accomplished the goal, and now the toxicity is more defining of you than the contribution. So then there's the normal stuff, and the book that really put me on the map was The Power of Understanding People, which was really just a simple fable about we think differently. People think differently. And because we think differently, we're inspired by different things. We have different intrinsic needs. We communicate in different ways. And so a leader who is kind of so self-absorbed that they insist on behaving in a singular way and expect people to respond to that positively without making any adaptation to these other people. As I'm fond of saying to CEOs, I could fire you and the organization would go on just fine. Yep. But if you lose all the people, it's over. So, you're not more important than your people. You just have more authority. Don't confuse authority with importance. But a lot of leaders do. A lot of leaders, I think, they believe their own press clippings. They get a little egocentric, and they expect the world to bend to them. And the best leaders are just the opposite. They understand the need to adjust to the people they lead.
There's a managerial competency called concern for impact. And what it means is I understand how my behavior impacts other people, what I say, how it impacts them, my decisions I make. And I actually think about that in how I speak and what I do, and which is just the opposite of I'm toxic and I know I'm toxic and I'm just going to let it go. That's like zero concern for impact. But let me just go to the adaptivity, and I'm going to get back into peace and people thing in a minute. But do you worry that we run the risk of, in our chameleon-like ability to adapt to the context, let's say in a highly agile leader, is there any level that makes you think, am I being truthful when I do that? Like, am I being myself in a way that's authentic when I'm flexible as to the situation for the goal of getting the outcome, not for any other reason? Do we lose some authenticity in that move?
Well, I think it's all about the motivations of the leader. I mean, if the leader is making these adjustments to people out of a place of empathy and emotional intelligence, and recognizing that the person in front of me, first of all, I believe true leadership trusts that the person in front of you wants to do a good job, that wants to be inspired. That, I get that not everybody's that. I'm a good Midwestern farm boy, salt of the earth. I'm a sarcastic optimist, is what I am. So I've been burned enough to know that there are some bad people in the world, but it's a small fraction. So I think good leaders assume good intentions among their people and try to be empathetic and try to meet them on their terms, right? I think the leader is required to shoulder more responsibility in having the success of this relationship with their people. I don't think that means that I have to become a different person. I don't think that means that I need to sacrifice, kind of my core integrity to adjust to everybody else. I think it's just being mindful that, look, you're different than me. I get that. And my job as a leader is to figure out how to inspire you and get, assemble a experience that drives you to the highest level of performance that you're capable of achieving. And so I don't think that's disingenuous. I think that's just part of being a leader. And I think that's part of the reason that it's hard to be a leader, effective
Right.
leader, because that's
Right.
not an easy thing to do. And I remember back in my Disney days, when people would walk in my office, I was in charge of human resources for a division of Disney, and they would say, I want to be a manager. And my
Right.
first reaction was, why?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're doing this for the money, I got bad news for you. If you start to calculate the hours invested versus the salary that you'll get, you're going to lose money. Secondly, it's people wear you out. They'll wear you out, and you've got to really have an incredible commitment to wanting to lead if you want to make this your career, because it's not as fulfilling as you might think it is.
Interesting. I had probably one of the most self-aware people I dealt with. I had an engineer that worked for me. His name was Napoleon, and excellent engineer, the best I had ever worked with in that place. And we needed a new engineering manager. I said, Napoleon, what would you think about becoming engineering manager? And he looks at me, he goes, what did I ever do to you that you would do that to me? Like,
right. At least he knew beforehand. Usually they come back to you 5 years later and say, why didn't you tell me?
No, yeah. He was that smart, right? That he knew that was not where he should be. He should keep doing what he's doing. He made plenty of money. His life was good. So your three books kind of run a story arc of, know yourself, know your people, and then impact, and then know your organization and culture. So let's start with know yourself. What are sort of the key extracts from that book that we should take away? That if you said, don't read the book, here are the three things you need to know from the book, what would be those things?
Yeah. So first, just to back up a little and give you the origin story on that.
Please.
So the power of understanding people, which would be the part of this trilogy that was understanding others, became kind of my iconic session. It won this, it was named Best Educational Seminar at the World Education Congress. I got Best Speaker. I got the book deal for the reasons that we talked about prior to the podcast.
Yep.
And so in doing that program, one of the things that always struck me was the whole point of that is to understand other people in your life. But after, everybody in the book signing line or just going around me after the conference, they wanted me to give them more detail on their assessment. Yeah. So it was a big realization of how little people actually think about who they are, what's important to them, what do I do well, what is my personal core ideology. So I took the work that I'd done with organizations and helping them understand, what's their special sauce and how do we make sure your organization embodies that and delivers a customer experience that matches this special sauce. And I just turned it into a self pursuit of understanding this. So, it talks about values, and I define values more broadly than most people do. I include things like money, wealth, fame, free time, because those are things people can value, right? So what do you value most? And then also this notion of interactive style. How do you tend to view the world? What do you prioritize? What do you elevate? How do you define things typically? And then how do you reflect that back to the world? And basically just an effort to get people to think about, who the heck am I? And I was really surprised at how few people really engage in that. I mean, I get it. There's never been a more distracting time to live than now. Right? It's like you've got a phone, you've got streaming services, you've got 500 channels on your direct TV. There is, sitting alone with your thoughts is frightening for people now, because it's what do I do? I'll go check my phone. I'll go on social media. We don't. I grew up walking around in the woods with my dog, pondering things. I still to this day call them the wander ponders.
Nice.
I think too few people really do that, and particularly at the C-suite level. I think that's a very important thing to make time for, because I go down a rabbit hole here, but I work with companies and they go out and I want venture capital and I want investors, and I'm like, you better be very careful, because pretty soon you're going to have a lot of people telling you what you are and you don't know what you are. And if you just listen to other people tell you what you are, this could get way off the track really fast. So So that's really the genesis and the purpose of the power of understanding yourself is, get in a lane, lock in, define who you are. That also helps you then understand how other people can be advantageous to you, what their value is, what their differences are. How do I, as a leader, more effectively bridge those differences? Because they're always, the number one cause of stress for a human being is other human beings. And the number one cause of death for human beings is stress. So if you don't figure this out, you're going to die soon. So.
Funny. I've always loved taking personality profiles and inventories and so forth. Not because I wanted to tell me what the answer is, but because I want to take the data and then just chew on it for a while. I go, do I resonate to that? Is that really me? How does that show up for me? So for example, my number one motivator is learning. I know that. And it's shown up in all kinds of places in my life.
I love that that's one of your hats. One of your hats and you're the lazy CEO. Yeah.
Is learner. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think everybody should be a learner, but that may be my bias, right? So there you go.
Right here. Yeah.
There you go. Pick it up on Amazon. Interesting. So now I have some conceptualization of who I am and what I'm not, maybe more importantly, what I'm good at, what I like to do, what I don't like to do. And I think alongside that is my boundaries, right? So relationships are defined by boundaries. That's me. And I'm not going to go over to this place that I'm not. Like I have a friend who is super people person, and she ended up taking a job that was very much a less of a people person job. And she's not very happy. Right?
Right.
So just to this exact point of knowing yourself and finding a place that's going to make you happy.
Happens all the time. It happens all the time, Jim. And the things that we value most in life, we start to sacrifice because of our career choices. And that's not a sustainable model, no. And it's only because people never really sat down and evaluated, well, holistically, how do I want my life to look? We just get lost into, I got a job, I do the job. And, 10 years later, it's like, I hate this damn job.
Hope it doesn't take 10 years, but yeah.
I'm 10 years older and it's like, how did this happen? And I don't, I'm not home as much as I want, or I'm not traveling, or I'm not doing whatever you value. And the other part of this is, when I talk to people, I'm like, you only get X amount of time. I know that sounds, let's go with 80 years. I know it sounds like a long time. As a 62-year-old, it doesn't sound that long to me anymore. So, it's like, the longer it takes you to figure out who you are, the less time you have to really live that life, right? So,
interesting. So let's riff over to the next, which is now I've got some awareness, hopefully a high level of awareness of who I am and my impact on others and so forth. You talked about like, how do you understand other people in a way that, and I think you're probably going after, in a way I can meet them where they are.
Right.
So talk us through that book and sort of the big takeaways.
Yeah, I know when I start my keynote speeches on this topic, I ask everybody, have you ever met someone for the first time and within a minute you just dig them like a ditch? Raise their hand. I said, and we talk about, self-efficacy and how when you feel good about a relationship, you generally perform at your highest level. If you're in sales and you connect with the buyer, the likelihood you're going to close this deal goes way up. But then I follow that up as, now, have you ever met someone and within a minute say to yourself, you might be the Antichrist, and everybody's hand goes up too. I'm like, yeah. And I said, well, the good news is they feel the same way about you. So it's not a character thing. It's not a values thing. It's just,
is it always symmetric?
Not entirely, but generally speaking, that's it's a symbiotic thing. If I feel that way about you, you probably feel that way about me. It's just, we match profiles. It's like a database of people that I've met in my life that are just irritating, and I can figure out real quickly you possess those same type of characteristics, and you're just going to be irritating. The dirty joke and all that is, this is probably a very valuable person to you because they see a lot of the things that are blind spots for you, but they can be very annoying to you, right? And so, we examine these differences. Disney loved assessments. I swear, if there was an assessment in Cosmo magazine, it would be assigned reading to every executive. But we did Myers-Briggs type indicator and disc profile and predictive index and Herman brain mapping and true colors. I took my exposure to all those, picked out the things I liked and didn't like. And I have a master's degree in global human resources development. So I had some exposure to cognitive and behavioral psychology, hired a psychologist who specialized in psychometric tools, and developed my own, partially because I wanted something that's specific to my goals, and also because I was an underfunded startup that couldn't afford to buy these assessments from every time. And from my Disney days, having snorted a lot of pixie dust, my assessment reports out in iconic Hollywood movie characters. So it was a way for us to discuss our differences using like these iconic fictional characters on screen. And it just really resonated with people. And I tell you what, Jim, after I do an event, I get more emails wanting someone to evaluate their spouse's assessment than I do like a coworker or a team member. So that was a big surprise for me. This was clearly established as a team building, leadership, even sales type of tool. But people immediately recognized, I don't really get my husband. My joke is always for the first 5 to 9 years, it's all hormonal based. And then after that, when you realize, oh crap, we're very different people.
Right.
So, I mean, this is a ubiquitous thing. It's leadership driven, but it's the relationships we have in our lives can be problematic, and having some way to better understand and appreciate that. I'm just giving people words that they can use to describe each other that they can share to their face instead of the ones that they say behind their back.
Interesting. So is that part of when I'm trying to understand my team? I got three Betty Whites, a Clark Gable, and a Brad Pitt on my team. Is that what I'm going to do? And therefore,
you would have the best friend, and you'd have a crusader, and you'd have a power broker, and you'd have an adventurer, and basically the four attributes I refer to as a romantic attribute, which is more emotionally sensitive, a warrior attribute, which is more logical, an expert attribute, which is more detailed and consistent, and a mastermind, which is more entrepreneurial and conceptual. And then these get combined. So you have a primary, a secondary, a tertiary, and a quaternary.
This is similar to some of the Jungian stuff I've done before.
It's definitely based on Jung,
right? Driver, expressive, analytic, amiable, right? Okay, interesting.
Some learning stuff. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And I always tell people,
I ripped it off. I will admit fully, I ripped it off. It is patented and validated, but it's basically I'm like every rock band since 1965. I just took everything that preceded me and put a new spin on it.
We work with a consulting company that took disc and put birds against it. So that's their move. So I'm a parrot or an owl or whatever, right? So an eagle.
Okay.
So anyway.
Parrot. Who wants to be a parrot? That just sounds like the company person.
That's an expressive.
Okay.
Colorful, talky. That's a parrot.
Oh, I think I'd have went with peacock. Yeah. Okay.
No, not a strutting peacock. Like they have their value. Everybody has their value, on a team. So you now translated that over, and I think this is really interesting for leadership, which is you understand yourself, understand your team. We always talk about culture, another hard to define word, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yet you speak to sort of how leaders can understand and engage with their culture, I think with the hope of moving in a sort of positive, affirmative direction. So help us with your thinking on culture, organizational culture.
Yeah, and since that's my most recent book,
the
hold it up, always requires that I throw there it is.
Peak Performance Culture by Dave Metrick. You're going to want to go, but Mitchell, you're going to want to pick it up by Wiley. I assume Amazon, all our favorite
Bezos can get it cheaper than I can, which really pisses me off. I don't know how they do that and how that affects my royalties. But anyway, so the genesis of this one was I was actually.
By the way, you remind me of a joke. If you're at a poker game and you can't figure out who the sucker is,
you're the sucker.
Right. You're playing poker.
Well, thank you for that, Jim. That's going to be it for me today. I'm signing out. So being this good Midwestern kid, I buy cars and I drive them until they're about to fall apart. So I went a good decade having never bought a new car. And when I went to buy a new car, the first thing I was amazed about was how much data the car provides you, right? I was still of the ilk where I had to kind of track my 3,000 to 5,000 miles to know when it was time to get the oil changed. And now the car gives you updates, tells you all these metrics. And I'm like, wouldn't it be great if a CEO had a dashboard like that for his own organization, his own culture? It's like where I could just kind of look in and check, my tire pressure and my how old my oil is and all this stuff. So that was kind of what I intended to create, was this kind of, what do you look for? How do you gauge culture? How do you define it? What are the elements of it? And then how do I make those individual elements effective and cohesive to create this intentional culture? Because every organization has a culture,
Totally.
that. It's just whether or not it was the one you wanted. And most times it's not. So the 5 metrics, I don't want to walk on my own material, but essentially it's like horizontal alignment. Do you have a core ideology that resonates with the marketplace and delivers the success scoreboard that you've identified? So this is a way of making sure that we got something. And here in Walla Walla, we have 150 wineries around a 35,000 person town.
Right.
And there's new wineries coming in every day. And so it's a great petri dish for examining, because it's really hard to make bad wine here in Walla Walla. I mean, this is just an incredible agricultural area. So as long as you have a competent winemaker, you're going to put something pretty good in the bottle. So you can't really hold yourself up as, well, our wines are better than other people. It's all about the brand and the experience you offer to the marketplace, right? And it's really cool to see the different efforts to do that and who actually executes on that and who doesn't. And that gets the vertical alignment, because there's a difference between a marketing brand and a core ideology. A marketing brand sounds really good on a commercial, but it may bear very little resemblance to the actual experience of working with that company.
Right.
A core ideology should embody every level, every corner of the organization. So that's a real tedious infrastructural issue where you look at your policies, your practices, how you compensate, who you hire, who you promote, why, and you just get and it never ends. It never ends, Jim. Disney was amazing at this, and every day we were ferreting out problems.
Wow. So
the third is the employee experience. We talk a lot about the customer experience, which is the fourth. But if you want a great customer experience, you're going to have to put some thought into the employee experience, because they're the ones who are going to deliver that. First tenet of human behavior breeds behavior.
Yep.
So if my employees are experiencing a crappy experience, they're never going to sustainably be able to create a great experience for my customers. And then the fifth one is something I just referred to as leadership ideology. We touched on this before. The people doing the work know exactly what's going on. They have the impact on the customer, but they have no authority or little authority very often to change anything. The people that have the authority to change the organization have very little knowledge of what's actually going on, because they're not putting on their player hat, just another one of your hats. They're not spending any time out there with where the customer interacts with the organization. And employees assume that these people are omniscient, right? They're like, everything I'm dealing with is intentional and they know about it and it's stupid, but what are you going to do? So you've got to create some mechanism, and it's not employee opinion surveys. That's a crock. If I can tell your CEO audience out there, you're wasting your money and a lot of it, and probably creating more harm than good. This is literally getting out there per your instructions in your book, The Lazy CEO. It's getting, which by the way, that's not a lazy CEO. That's a good CEO, but I understand it's a great, that's why I didn't read The Lazy CEO, because it's like, well, I want to be good to the brand there. I'm going to read the professional drinking book. But anyway, those C-suite level people got to be out there. They got to be talking minimally to their direct reports and mandating their direct reports talk to their next level. And every level is talking all the time with the people that they lead, so that they have this open channel of forthright feedback and this recognition that, look, I don't know it unless you tell me it. So you got to tell me it, and then we can try to fix it, or I can explain why, even if it's problematic, it's necessary because of the impact it has somewhere else in the organization. Right. Not enough organizations have a thoughtful, intentional mechanism for reconciling this imbalance in the organization.
Interesting.
And I just feel like I wrote too much in my book, because I feel like I just described everything in the last 3 minutes. So I don't know.
No, it's okay. You still need to read the book. It's funny.
You really do. But maybe just a few pages. Yeah.
it's interesting you go down that, because I'm actually writing. I went back to school. I told you I'm a learner, so I went back to school. I'm working on a paper in that, actually, my dissertation, and it's about strategy implementation and collaboratively obtaining information upward and downward within the organization. Super important. Empowering the lowest level to make change. Super important, because they change the how we do things. Leadership owns the what we're going to do. And those two work together. They're symbiotic, and the data flows have to be real, or you're never going to correct. There's no learning loop that occurs. If you lose the learning loop, your strategy won't get implemented properly. So a lot of what you talked about is supported very much in the scholarly literature, as it turns out. It's very, very well supported, ultimately. So interesting.
Good stuff.
So Dave, maybe we'll do just 1 second on wine. People ask me this all the time. I'm going to ask you this incredibly unfair question. And Dave, you're fairly highly certified wine. You went up what program did you go up?
So I'm an advanced sommelier in the International Wine Guild. So that's not quite as rigorous, not quite as an understatement, as the Court of Master Sommeliers. Right. But it still was a 2-year process. And I did that for the reasons that you, I think, stopped, was they did not require the service element. And that was kind of the big distinguishing factor. And I do have an ownership stake in a winery here in Walla Walla. And my lovely bride is the tasting room manager at another competitive winery. So I help her out from time to time. So I do have this kind of side hustle in the industry, but it certainly wouldn't, like you, it's like, that's as far as I can go, as far as my palate will take me. Yeah. And as far as my time will take me. But well, actually, but I'm surrounded by master somms here, and it's like that movie Somm is dead on. These people are not right. They are not right.
Oh well, I went as high as certified level 2, and there was a service element to it, but to go to advanced, which is level 3, and there's only like 1,000 in the world, you have to actually work in a restaurant. Yeah, like I'm not doing that. So when I talk about, I love to go to them, but when I talk about master sommeliers, I go, imagine, because there's only like 250 in the world. I mean, it's really
I have a friend here in Walla Walla, Doug Frost, who just opened a winery, who is, I think, one of 3 or 4 that have both the Master Somm and the Master of Wine.
MW and MS. Yeah, that's a big deal. So
deal.
There are more astronauts than there are master sommeliers. Just to put it in context, it's about 550 astronauts, and there's But I talk about, it's 160 IQ, all dedicated to wine.
Yeah, exactly.
They're freaks. So anyway, besides the winery you own, what's your favorite wine, or what's your favorite region?
God, that's like, now I see why you preface this by it's an
unfair question.
Like, which is your favorite child?
Right.
Yeah. Well, gun to my head, I'd have to go into Rhone, and I'd probably be very specific and go to Châteauneuf-du-Pape. I like Syrah, Grenache, Mourvedre. I like that they have so much variety. So, I mean, if you rephrase that question, like you only could drink wine from one region the rest of your life, I'd pick Rhone only because there's so much variety there. But I love Italian wines. I love Walla Walla wines, and I'll be kicked out of the Wine Alliance now that I didn't say Walla Walla. Yeah. But, and Walla Walla is very much like the Rhone region in that we can grow beyond Rhone varietals. We can do Bordeaux varietals. Right. We can do basically everything but Burgundy here, really. Yep.
No, I think Washington is a comer. I still think it's relatively undiscovered. There's great value. PQ there. Value for money is out of crazy. Even Willamette has already kind of moved up the numbers. Washington's behind that. So if you want to drink value quality wines, go to Washington. You'll do great.
You're absolutely right. We are woeful at marketing. And I'm trying to figure out if that's intentional or just a skill set that we've never quite figured out. I think because we are so good at so many things, we can't figure out how to brand ourselves. But now we're going to get cork dorky here, Sharon. So I apologize. But what we are basically is the perfect middle space between New World and Old World wines. And I know you talk about those designations in the book. We are fruit forward, but not cloying. We are terroir driven, but we're not like chewing on barnyard dirt. We are And we're a lot less expensive than most wine regions in the world. So
but it's
we
a
just
problem.
can't
It's the
figure
same
out how
problem
to
you have in a company. When you're good at lots of things, you're not good at one thing. And what are you known for, right? Like being known for good for lots of things isn't a thing to be known for, unfortunately.
Right? No utility infielder makes the Hall of Fame, right?
They don't get paid the big bucks either, right?
No.
Yeah. So on that note, we're gonna wrap it up. Everybody needs to go, like, right now, before you do anything else, go pick up Dave's latest book, Peak Performance Culture: The 5 Metrics of Operational Excellence from the Leadership Difference. And Dave, what if people want more of you? Because I know you do some consulting and speaking and so forth. Where would they go to find more of you?
You would go to www.theleadershipdifference.com.
There you go. Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome, Jim. It was a pleasure.
This was really way fun and super interesting. Well, thank you so much. Have yourself a great day.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
This podcast is brought to you by the CEO Project. At the CEO Project, we work with CEOs to help them grow their business. And our members represent billions of dollars of revenue and profit. And frankly, amongst all of us, we've probably made every mistake in the book, including some you haven't made yet. So if you want to learn from the experience of a bunch of really seasoned CEOs, we're a great place to hang out. In this podcast, what you're going to hear are some of those ideas, concepts, and things that are just going to help you on your journey. If you want to find out more, reach out to us at theceoproject.com, or you can contact me personally at jim@theceoproject.com. Happy listening.
Thanks for listening to the Lazy CEO podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes, and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.